Hi guys, so today I wanted to show you how I would approach adding tests to an existing code base that you might have no knowledge of how it works, or maybe you do, but there's no test for it. Maybe you need to change something and you want to make sure you don't break the code while you make the changes, so you want to add tests first. Here is a controller. It's from a repo that I found on GitHub. It's not my code. I don't know how it works, so I'm gonna walk you through how I would approach doing this. What I'm gonna add test to is this PayPal checkout method. The reason I choose this one is because it has a dependency on this library, which is I'm assuming it's a PayPal wrapper, so it interacts with the PayPal API, and I wanted to show you how I would approach that interacting with external APIs in this circumstance where I'm not really sure how it works or how it is set up. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a test, artisan make test, and I'm gonna call it PayPal controller test, since the controller is called PayPal controller, so PayPal controller test. Okay, now I'm gonna open the controller test, and here we have our test. I'm not gonna be needing this, so I'm gonna remove it. And then so I'm gonna think about how I'm gonna approach this test. So first, let me show you the routes. So here's the route for that specific method on the controller. So it's a PayPal checkout with an order, I'm assuming an order number or ID, and then that's what we get in the controller. If you can see here, we get the order ID, and then that gets passed to this checkout data method that I'm gonna show you. Here it is. So here we get a discount coupon from the session. Apparently we're using this card facade that is this one. It appears to be a library. As I said before, I'm not really sure how this code works, but I'm assuming it's a library to handle cards for e-commerce websites. So here we get the subtotal from that card, and then we subtract the discount, and then we map all the contents of the card, which I'm assuming are the items in the card. So you add a t-shirt, a sweater. This will be mapped into an array with the name, price, and the amount, the quantity. From those items, we create another array that contains the items, and then we have the return URL, the cancel URL, the invoice ID, which appears to be just a random unique ID, and then the description and the total. I'm assuming that this is the way you need to pass the data to the PayPal API, or at least to the PayPal wrapper that we're using. So what I want to test here is that this data gets passed correctly to that wrapper. But since I don't really, I've never used PayPal, so since I don't want to struggle to set up a testing environment for PayPal, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create an interface that will allow me to inject a fake checkout provider so that I can test that data gets passed to the fake provider without any issues. So let me just show you, because I don't think I explained it very well. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a directory, make in-app billing, and then I'm gonna create app billing checkout provider. And then let me just add the boilerplate here. Okay, so I create this interface that I'm gonna inject into my controller, and then in production we're gonna create an implementation for PayPal, and in testing we're gonna create an implementation for a fake implementation. So I'm gonna create a method here in this interface, set checkout, and I'm gonna receive checkout, which is gonna be the checkout data. So here we create this express checkout, and then we call this set express checkout and pass the checkout data. I'm gonna change this. One thing to keep in mind when doing this type of changes is you want to be as careful as possible to not make too many changes. So you want to be as conservative as you can before you add the test. So try not to refactor too much, because this method isn't tested yet. So try to change as little as possible, keeping the behavior as close as how it was before as possible. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just inject here the interface. So checkout provider, let me import that, then provider. I'm gonna call it the same name so it's easier to modify the code without making any mistakes. So I just have to delete this one, and then here instead of set express checkout, I'm just gonna remove the express and set checkout, and that should work. Now that we created a interface to interact with the checkout provider, I'm gonna create an implementation of that interface. That's gonna be the production implementation. So I'm gonna just create a PayPal checkout provider. So here, just gonna copy this and then so it implements the checkout provider. So here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add the code that was in our controller before. So provider is gonna be to new express checkout, and then I'm gonna return provider set express checkout with the checkout data that we received from our controller. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bind this current implementation to our interface so it gets injected in the controller when we're on production. So I'm gonna open the app service provider. Here in the register function, I'm gonna call this app bind checkout provider, which is the interface with the implementation, which is gonna be PayPal checkout provider. So now if I go to Tinker, this is PHP Artisan, it's just an alias that I have, PA, and then Tinker, and then I run app, and then class, we should get the PayPal checkout provider. So Laravel will automatically give our controller a PayPal checkout provider when it asks for a checkout provider. The reason we're doing this is that, so in our test, we can bind another implementation. So I'm gonna create here a fake implementation. So class fake checkout provider implements checkout provider, and then public function set checkout. I'm gonna return what our controller will expect. As you can see, we're accessing a PayPal link to redirect to. So I'm gonna just return an array with a PayPal link to a hard-coded URL. So I'm just gonna PayPal link, and then let's just say HTTPS, and then my website. Now, since I want to make assertions against this checkout data that we're receiving, I'm gonna create a property checkout, and then when this function gets called, I'm gonna do this checkout equals checkout, the checkout we're receiving. So now the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just test redirects to PayPal. Okay, so I'm going to run this route and then check that we get redirected to the expected website. So it's gonna be, sorry, let me just copy this, and then here I'm just gonna add a dummy number, just 1 2 3, and then I'm going to remove this. I forgot, the first thing we need to do is we need to bind the fake checkout provider to the checkout provider. So this app, here I'm gonna bind an instance instead of using bind like we did in the app service provider, just because we need to make assertions against this checkout property, and this an instance property, so we need to keep the instance in memory. So I'm gonna just provider equals new fake checkout provider, and then instance, and then checkout provider class is this one. Okay, so now we need to assert the response, so redirect, and then HTTPS, because we want to assert that our controller is redirecting to whatever the PayPal link is. So in this case, cosme.dev. So if I run this test, I should get a passing test. So PayPal controller test. That test passes. But one thing you might be thinking is that we shouldn't actually get redirected to the PayPal link because we don't have anything in our cart. So it doesn't make sense. For example, if your cart is empty, what are you gonna pay for? Nothing. There's nothing there. So this is a bug that is currently on the system. So it might be a good idea to change the behavior so it throws an error or it shows some message to the user. I'm not gonna change that for now because what I want to do is I want to keep the current behavior tested before I add or change or modify anything else. So this is gonna remain the same until I test. I make sure that the current behavior is completely tested, so I know that I'm not breaking anything else when making those changes. So I'm gonna add another test just to make sure that the checkout provider is receiving the information correctly. So here I'm gonna do the same as here. So now, I need to add items to the cart. So how do I do that? Let me check cart. The facade. Okay, so return accessor. I'm just gonna assume that is this class here that is from the library. So I'm gonna search for a add method or something like that. Okay, here it is. So add ID, name, quantity, price, and options. So I'm gonna add a couple of items with the ID, the name, the quantity, and the price. So let me just cart add. I'm just gonna do one for the ID. I'm gonna say a Laravel t-shirt, and then the quantity, I'm just gonna do 1, and the price is gonna be, let's say, $20. So let me import this card, facade card. Okay, now I'm going to do a Laravel hoodie, and then this time I'm gonna add 2 hoodies to the cart, and then these ones are worth, let's say, $50. They're expensive hoodies. So okay, now that we have 2 items on our cart, we need to make sure that our checkout provider receives 2 items. So what I'm gonna do is this assert count to provider checkout, and remember this provider checkout is this one, which is called in our controller here in set checkout. So we're receiving this checkout data array, which is this checkout data, since that's what the function returns. We see that the cart items are in the items key in the array, so we're gonna go items. I'm gonna make a couple of assertions and then explain each one, since it's gonna take me a little bit. Okay, so I wrote this assertion. So I'm asserting that it has the Laravel t-shirt item and then the Laravel hoodie item with the correct value. So the price is 50 for the Laravel hoodie, and for the t-shirt is 20, and the quantity is 2 for the hoodie and 1 for the shirt. And then I'm asserting that the return URL is equal to success with the order ID, this order ID, because that's what it does here. So route success with the order ID, and then the same for the cancel URL, and then the same for the order description. For the total, I want it to be the $20 for the t-shirt, and then 50 times 2 because we have 2 Laravel hoodies. Now, if I run this test, it fails because I forgot to change the ID here. So this should be 2. I'm assuming it gets replaced if you don't change the ID. So I'm gonna run it again. It should pass. Okay, now we have 2 passing tests, and one thing I didn't test for is this invoice ID, which calls this is a PHP function. So the reason I'm not testing this is because the way I would do it is inject something I can swap out so I can assert against it in the test, but I'm not gonna do that in this video just because it's getting a little bit long, but that could be something you can try for yourself. So now we have almost everything tested. The only thing that is not tested is the discount code. So what happens is if you have a discount within the session, you should get that amount subtracted from your total. So let's add a test for that. Applies discount. I'm gonna do the same as here. I'm gonna copy this. You might get uncomfortable copying and pasting too much code within your test. I don't usually bother too much in changing that because at their test is okay if there's a little duplicated code. Now I need to add items to the cart as well. So I'm gonna copy this here. And then to add values to session in the test, we can use the with session helper method. So we can pass an array with the values. So if we check here, we need to pass the coupon, and that coupon needs to have a discount value. So I'm just gonna pass coupon and then discount, and then the discount can be whatever you want. And I'm gonna say $5. I just need to assert that the price is exactly the same as here. I'm just gonna copy this, I'm gonna paste it, but minus the discount, so it's gonna be minus the $5. If I run all our tests, this should pass. So let me run it. And there we have it. Now we have the checkout method totally tested. So now we can, for example, make the bug fix that I mentioned before, where if the cart is empty, then we throw an error or show an error to the user. And we're gonna be more secure and more confident that we're not breaking anything else in our test. So thank you for watching. Until next time.